Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. My name is Audrey Bennett. I'm a professor of art and design at the University of Michigan's Penny W. Stamp School of Art and Design. Today, I am with my research assistant, Nicholas Marca, a second-year MFA candidate and photographer. We are delighted to present our creative research project on making museums accessible for all visitors through the inclusive co-creation of audio descriptions. We will provide some background information, discuss our objectives, report findings from research we've been conducting this past year, and discuss our future work. At the end of our presentation, if there's time, we will respond to any questions you may have. The work we're presenting today stems from a project titled I Don't See What You Mean, Broadening Participation Through Co-Created Inclusive Digital Museum Audio, funded jointly by the National Endowment for the Humanities in the US and the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK through their New Directions for Digital Scholarship in Cultural Institutions program. I am the PI on the NEH portion of the grant, and UK psychologist Dr. Alison Eardley is a PI on the AHRC-funded part of the project. In the United States, we're working with the Smithsonian Institution's National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. And in the United Kingdom, we're working with the Watts Gallery and the Art Center in Guildford. Those who are sighted have the privilege of visiting museums, looking at the 2- and 3-dimensional artwork on its walls and in its spaces, and reading contextual information about the artwork through concisely written placards positioned next to or near it. Our society assumes that it is acceptable to make sight compulsory to access visually presented information, and that sight alone is sufficient. However, those who are blind and partially blind are marginalized from these cultural experiences, though they have a legal right to access and experience visual art in museums. How can we redesign the experience of engaging with artwork in a museum to be more inclusive for blind and partially blind people and develop a co-creation model that museums, cultural heritage organizations, or science centers can use to co-create inclusive audio descriptions? According to Snyder, the literary art form of audio description was developed in the United States to provide a verbal version of visual events for people with visual impairments to hear what cannot be seen. One can access audio descriptions at theater performances and museum exhibitions. However, even when museums can offer AD, either pre-recorded or live tours, that provision tends to be limited in terms of the number of collections or exhibits for which it is available and for live tours when offered. Unfortunately, audio description tends to be a resource-demanding component of museum experiences. For that reason, only 5% of museums in the United Kingdom mention an AD provision on their websites. Yet, ironically, both the United Kingdom and the United States have equitable access to culture enshrined in law. As time passed since audio description was first developed, so too has technology. Many museums now have a digital presence that provides access to millions of artworks in their collections. One of the leaders of audio description access is Smartify, a website that facilitates remote interaction with over 2 million works of art from museums worldwide, including those of the Smithsonian Institution. However, less than 20 of the Smithsonian's artworks are audio described. There is also Vocal Eyes, a registered charity in the UK that works with local arts organizations to identify and remove barriers to access and inclusion for blind and partially sighted people by providing live audio descriptions of theatrical plays, museum art, heritage site, etc. Our research goal is to evaluate a workshop model for the inclusive co-creation of audio descriptions with diverse blind, partially blind, and sighted audiences, and provide a proof of concept that, one, democratizes the creation of digitally available museum audio descriptions to enhance representation and engagement by traditionally marginalized groups. Two, improves visitor-facing experiences of analog and digital access to a diverse range of artworks for all museum visitors towards fostering digitally enabled, equitable participation. And three, extends the reach of inclusive digital audio to global museum audiences by considering potential cultural differences in expectations and reception of inclusive audio description. In doing so, we will provide museum practitioners with a robust model to enrich and extend their accessibility provisions to engage traditionally marginalized audiences. To achieve these goals, we are comparing the experiences of frequent and novice museum goers in the UK and US to address these central research questions. One, what level of guidance do co-creation groups need to produce a draft audio description within a one-day workshop? Two, how do groups choose to incorporate different voices, positionalities, and identities between a co-created AD? And three, how do sighted and BPP audiences experience digitally co-created inclusive AD online? This research project aims to challenge normative biases associated with the creation of audio descriptions, including the notion that audio descriptions are universal and unimodal. In June and July, we conducted 4 one-day workshops at the National Portrait Gallery to test a model of inclusive co-created audio description by museum professionals with museum visitors who are blind and partially blind. In June and July, we conducted 4 one-day workshops at the National Portrait Gallery to test a model of inclusive co-created audio description by museum professionals with museum visitors who are blind or partially blind. In each workshop, the museum practitioner and the participants sit in a semicircle around the artwork and converse about the portrait. The aim is to get as much information about the participants' experience of the portrait and how they describe it. In the second session, the participants respond to probing questions by the museum practitioner while looking at the painting. We then created and tested 3 versions of the actual writing of the audio description. In one model, the participants led the writing of the audio description in collaboration with the museum practitioner. In another model, the participants wrote down their own description, after which the museum professional brings them together in a final set of audio descriptions that are separated for a multimodal audio description experience. In the third version, the museum practitioner develops the audio description independent of the participants based on notes taken from the co-interpretation and individual interpretation sessions in the gallery in front of the portraits. These are some of our observations. The blind participant asked for a sensory component she could step on and hear which painting was ahead of her and the contextual information up front. However, the museum facilitator said that would not be possible. The blind participant stood up and asked for help from the sighted and partially blind participants by positioning her upper body, head, arms, and hands the same way that George Washington Carver's body is situated in the painting. The Caucasian sighted participant was evasive about describing the skin color of George Washington Carver, which affected the experience of the other participants who were BIPOC. How we create and experience audio description should be inclusive of multicultural perspectives and accessible via multiple modes and senses. Only then can we broaden participation in museum experiences for access, inclusion, and justice. This finding is grounded in interactive aesthetics that democratizes the interpretation of images to account for diversity and puts interactive aesthetics in conversation with other scientists and humanists. How can the value generated by all involved in the creation of inclusive audio description return to all contributors? How can the interpretation of an artwork be more bottom-up and generative rather than top-down and directive? In the second part of the study, we will test standard audio descriptions created by museum professionals alongside our co-created audio descriptions with sighted, blind, and partially blind individuals to determine how they experience standard versus co-created audio descriptions. We also aim to determine any potential cultural differences in the reception of audio descriptions. In grappling with our findings, we will address how museums can broaden the participation of culturally and socioeconomically diverse visitors in the future JUST museum experience. To attain equity and justice in the museum experience, we will apply interactive aesthetics to the speculative design of the future JUST museum experience that facilitates visitors' intersensory and multicultural engagement with art through a simultaneity of multisensory stimuli afforded by technological mediation across time and space. So if we return to that problematic museum context that still today privileges those who are sighted, how do we apply interactive aesthetics through generative sense-making and provide museums with a low-cost, inclusive, and co-created audio description model where visitors who are blind, partially blind, and sighted come together to collectively interpret artwork through a community-engaged educational program? How do we apply interactive aesthetics through generative sense-making to facilitate a multisensory experience of visual artwork? And with the online version of the museum that sustained museum attendance during the pandemic, but still to no real avail for the partially blind and blind, how might we apply interactive aesthetics through generative sense-making to facilitate a multimodal experience of artwork that acknowledges and respects cultural difference by enabling viewers to interact with multiple perspectives of an artwork, or even arrange for a collective in-person or digital interpretation with other viewers and visitors? Here's a diagram of the transatlantic design of audio description evaluation instruments in the US and the UK that we're working on. And here's another diagram depicting the workflow for the online assessment that is inclusive of blind and partially blind participants who are relying on a screen reader. Thank you so much. Please contact us directly with any questions.